This was arguably the most beloved Dota 2 event ever. It was a perfect escape from normal, often toxic matchmaking. Everybody loved it.
Which Dota event is my favorite?
Aghanim Labyrinth.
Aghanim's Labyrinth.
Aghanim's Labyrinth.
Oh, Aghanim's Labyrinth. Gotta be Aghanim's Labyrinth.
Diretide is fun.
Are you serious right now, bro?
But what made this event so loved, and what made others fall flat? I look back at some of the greats, and it became pretty clear what Dota players actually want. But we're not stopping there, because today we're going to revisit many past events and see what made the community love, hate, or completely forget about them. Our goal is to look at what Dota 2 has been through and where things seem to be going, whether that's for the best or for the worst. To kick things off, I want to ask you a question. What does this mean to you? Do you feel anything? Do any words come to mind? If so, you're old, or at least cultured. If you don't get it, don't worry. I'll explain in a bit. Back in October 2012, Dota 2 was still technically in beta. The International 2 had just happened a few months earlier. Valve was onboarding new players and the game was still finding its identity. People knew Dota was intense, competitive, sometimes stressful, but it hadn't really shown a fun side yet. Diretide flipped that on its head. Instead of a standard 5v5 mode, it was a Halloween-themed event where the objective was candy. Creeps dropped taffy, which players had to collect and deposit in their team's stash. Meanwhile, you could raid the enemy's stash, so it had a tug-of-war PvP element. And then came the finale, a massive PvE raid boss fight against Roche, where both teams had to band together to bring him down. And people went crazy for this. Diretide felt like the first time Dota said, hey, this game can be silly too. The candy chase was hilarious, and the Roche fight created this unforgettable moment where enemies became allies for just a few minutes. This kind of unity where everybody's coming together to coordinate against Roche is something you just don't really get in normal matchmaking. It was so beloved that when Valve didn't release Diretide in 2013, the community erupted with the famous Volvo Give Diretide meme. That meme became a part of Dota culture, proof of just how iconic the event had become. Moving forward, 2 months later, in December 2012, Valve tried their hand at a winter holiday event. Except in true Valve fashion, there was a twist. Frostivus was cancelled. They announced the winter event, the next day they announced that it's cancelled, then the next day they announced it's released, but in the form of the Grieveling. This was a light-hearted PvE minigame where players could summon and transform into their little Greevil pets, creatures that hatched from eggs given out in the Diretide they just played in. So it was a cool little connection between the two events. You'd fight creeps, use silly abilities, and mess around in a less structured environment. It was more of a party mode than a competitive event. The Grieveling wasn't as universally loved as Diretide. Some people thought it was too simple and shallow, but others enjoyed the goofy chaos. What really made it memorable though was the tradition that it started. Frostivus became a running joke. Some years it was cancelled, some years it was reimagined, and it gave Valve an excuse to play around with Dota's lore. Even though this event didn't have the same lasting power as Diretide, it showed that Valve was experimenting, testing what kind of side content could keep people engaged outside of the standard 5v5 grind. And now let's get into a bit of a blunder Valve had on their next event. By early 2014, Dota had exploded in popularity. The game was officially out of beta, the International 3 was behind us, and Valve was trying to keep the momentum going. For the Lunar New Year, they launched New Bloom, the biggest event yet, but it came with some problems. The centerpiece was the Year Beast, a colossal unit that a team of 5 had to face in an arena-style fight. The goal was to deal as much damage as possible to the beast to earn event rewards. It was ambitious and the community enjoyed it. And we even got 2 new heroes, Terrorblade and Phoenix. For a lot of players, it felt like a real festival inside Dota. The problems came the following year when Valve brought the Year Beast back. This time, the Beast charged down lanes in normal 5v5 matches. Players could empower their team's Year Beast with special abilities. But the catch was those abilities were tied to points, and those points could be purchased with real money. You see where this is going? The hype was real, and it came with a flood of players. Exciting for any developer, unless your servers can't handle it. You see, Valve introduced a special queue system for the Year Beast matches. People could only get in 20-minute windows. This meant everyone was trying to cram in at the same time. Servers got overloaded and many people couldn't get in at all. Once players eventually got in, the pay-to-win system killed the fun almost instantly. Teams who didn't spend money were hopelessly outmatched. To Valve's credit, they did try to salvage it. Some players appreciated the attempt, but for many, the damage was already done. Looking back, New Bloom is remembered as ambitious and flawed. It showed Valve wasn't afraid to tie major content, new heroes, map reskins, whole game modes into seasonal events. New Bloom raised the bar for what Dota events could be, even if it stumbled in execution. And that was great, because what came next was something that nobody really wanted. 2016 for Dota 2 was empty, at least for in-game events. At this time, Valve shifted focus to the new major tournament system for the professional scene, a more established structure throughout the year. Great for viewers and professional players. But this meant that for the first time since 2012, there were no seasonal events. The first year where both Halloween and Christmas events were skipped. Instead, players got mini events and quest lines inside battle passes. This was essentially PvE type grinding inside normal matchmaking, not full event game modes. The community felt it instantly. Without events like Diretide and New Bloom, the game lost a sense of seasonal rhythm and togetherness. The hero-specific challenges were fun, but they were also lonely. You weren't screaming on the mic with friends trying to take down a giant beast. You were just doing side quests on your own. People used to look forward to logging in for something fresh around the holidays or Lunar New Year, and suddenly that was gone. Now, of course, players love skins, right? And they definitely were getting those through these mini events in the battle passes. But the rising trend, whether players were realizing it or not, were the co-op events. To Valve's credit, 2016 was when the massive 7.0 update was released. So that, along with the reworked tournament structure, there was a lot going on behind the scenes for them. For many, 2016 marked the beginning of a pattern where fun modes became rarer and rarer as Valve doubled down on cosmetics and competitive play. But it seemed Valve heard some of those concerns because in 2017, they came back guns blazing. In January 2017, Valve finally delivered with Dark Moon, a Lunar New Year event themed around Salamene and her temple. For a lot of players, it felt like Valve was taking events seriously again, trying to create something more substantial than a reskin map or a side quest. Dark Moon was a 5-player co-op PvE mode where your team defended against 15 waves of enemies. Each wave got harder and your team only had a limited number of lives until dawn. And players loved this. Dark Moon reminded people that events weren't just about grinding battle passes and getting cosmetics. They could be about challenge and teamwork. This was one of the first times Dota gave players a true survival style PvE mode. Now, it wasn't perfect. Many players complained it was too punishing, that the scaling made later waves borderline impossible. But the difficulty did give it some appeal. People kept queuing with friends, determined to beat their personal best wave, and it sparked guides and community discussion about the best team composition. Most importantly, it reignited that sense of co-op adventure and community cooperation. And this set the stage for potentially Valve's biggest experiment yet later that year. As part of the International 2017 Battle Pass, they introduced Siltbreaker, the first ever act-based event in Dota. By this point, players had tasted smaller co-op survival modes like Dark Moon. But what if Valve actually leaned into this type of gameplay? Siltbreaker was their answer. It was essentially Dota reimagined as a co-op RPG. 4 players picked heroes from a limited pool and entered dungeon-like maps filled with waves of enemies, traps, and bosses. It was split into 2 acts, released in phases. You could earn artifacts that boosted your runs and climb leaderboards for bragging rights. It felt closer to Diablo than traditional Dota, but it still had its Dota charm. The further you pushed, the more the game demanded teamwork. You couldn't just carry your way through, you had to cooperate. Siltbreaker was a hit. For many players, it was the first time Dota felt like a completely different game, but inside the same client. But why did this resonate so much with players? The co-op experience. In a game like Dota 2, where there's so much emphasis on grinding the ranks, having a space with a similar feeling but a different goal was a much needed breath of fresh air. Siltbreaker gave you a reason to team up with friends against a common enemy. You weren't fighting each other or worrying about your MMR, you were in it together. That shared struggle created the kind of camaraderie players remembered long after the event ended. And that idea would carry on into some of Valve's most beloved events later on. By 2018, the gaming world was in the middle of a battle royale explosion. Fortnite and PUBG were dominating headlines and the last team standing format was everywhere. Valve decided to experiment with a Dota flavored take. As part of the International 2018 Battle Pass, they introduced the Underhollow. The Underhollow dropped 8 teams of 3 into a giant underground labyrinth beneath Roshan's lair. The objective was straightforward: survival. Just like a classic battle royale, the map gradually shrank over time, forcing fights until only one team remained. But this wasn't just PvP carnage. Teams also had to farm neutral creeps for gold and collect Roshan's cheese scattered around the caverns, which added a PvE layer on top of the chaos. This meant every decision had a risk. Do you push deeper for cheese and farm, or play it safe and risk being underpowered when you inevitably clash with another team? Underhollow was pure fun. It had the unpredictability of a battle royale, but with Dota mechanics layered on top. Without the high-stakes stress of ranked, players could just relax, laugh, and enjoy the absurdity of running into another trio at the worst possible time. Some even said it was the most fun they'd had in Dota in years, because it felt more like a party game than a competitive grind. That said, it didn't quite have the depth or replayability of something like Siltbreaker. Once you played a bunch of runs and experimented, there wasn't much progression to keep you hooked. The event faded fairly quickly once the initial excitement was over. Still, Underhollow proved that Valve could adapt the big gaming trends in a way that felt unique to Dota. It wasn't just a copy of Fortnite or PUBG, it had its own bizarre twist on the genre. And while it didn't leave a lasting legacy like the big co-op campaigns, it reinforced the idea that Dota's events could be playgrounds for experimentation. Valve could take risks, and players could discover new ways to enjoy the game together. And after all of the experiments over the years, Valve started to get a pretty good grasp on what players really wanted, which is why the next event changed everything. By 2020, Valve's event history was a mixed bag. We'd had highs like Siltbreaker and Underhollow, but also forgettable misses that I didn't even mention. Then, the pandemic hit. The International, the biggest event in Dota's calendar, canceled for the first time ever. The community was restless, anxious, and stuck at home, but also desperately needing something to rally around. That's when Valve dropped a bombshell: Aghanim's Labyrinth. Out of nowhere, Dota got a brand new mode that felt like an entirely different game, and it hit at exactly the right time. Labyrinth was a 4-player co-op roguelike dungeon crawl, unlike anything Dota had seen before. Each run felt fresh. Randomized rooms, escalating waves of enemies, branching paths that forced tough decisions, and bosses that required coordination. Between fights, players upgraded their heroes into new and unique versions of themselves. These modifiers made each run unpredictable. And overseeing it all was Aghanim himself, finally stepping out of the lore and into the spotlight as the event's narrator. The community adored it. It had everything: difficulty, fresh runs, humor, and most importantly, a sense of true teamwork. Players weren't just grinding cosmetics, they were strategizing together, theory crafting builds, and pushing to see how far they could go. People were logging on not to play ranked, not even to play unranked, but to run through the labyrinth again and again. Reddit filled with stories of miracle saves, impossible boss wipes, and the heartbreak of losing on the final room. Valve kept it alive with weekly trials, which introduced mutators and set challenges that pushed even the best teams to their limits. Leaderboards became competitive, and for some, Labyrinth was more compelling than the base game itself. For many players, it felt like the perfect blend of challenge, replayability, and fun, to the point that even years later, fans still beg Valve to bring it back. And Valve actually did revisit it once. In late 2021, they released Aghanim's Labyrinth, the Continuum Conundrum. The sequel expanded on the formula with new bosses, mechanics, and even more chaotic abilities. It didn't quite have the same shock factor as the original, but it showed that Valve recognized the love the community had for Ag's Lab. But what made this event so special wasn't just the design, it was the timing. In a year where people were physically apart, Dota gave them something that brought them together. It wasn't ranked stress or battle pass grind. It was 4 friends or even randoms teaming up, laughing through the madness, and trying again and again and again. It showed the absolute best of what a Dota event could be, a whole new way to experience the game, and a reminder of how much fun Dota can be when it's about shared adventure instead of endless competition. After Aghanim's Labyrinth, Dota events started to feel different. The massive co-op game modes weren't showing up anymore. Instead, Valve began leaning into lore and cosmetics. Crownfall is the clearest example of this shift. a multi-act event that ran from late 2023 into early 2024, and it lasted longer than most Dota events in history. Crownfall wasn't really a standalone game mode like Siltbreaker or Aghanim's Labyrinth. Instead, it was built around a large interactive map. You'd play regular Dota matches to earn progress, which unlock new areas, cutscenes, and rewards. Each act pushed forward a narrative centered on Skywrath Mage and Vengeful Spirit. It was probably Dota's most ambitious storytelling effort to date, with artwork, cosmetics, and comics. The response was mostly positive, but a bit mixed. On one hand, lore fans were thrilled. Crownfall delivered high-quality art, characters, and a sense of world building Dota had rarely attempted. For players who cared about the universe of Dota, it was a treat. But for many others, it didn't scratch the same itch like many of the greats. There was no new co-op challenge, no PvE gauntlets, no wild mechanics to explore. Progression was tied to grinding standard Dota matches, which made it feel more like a marathon than an event. Crownfall was impressive in scale and presentation, but it lacked the wow factor that came from events you could play together. Crownfall marked a turning point. Instead of investing in complex co-op experiments, Valve put its energy into something safer and more predictable, an ongoing narrative tied to the normal Dota experience. Now that's not necessarily bad. It showed that Valve still wants to deliver big content drops for Dota, but it also highlighted how different their focus seems to be now compared to the days of Ag's Lab or Siltbreaker. And it raises the question, why this shift? We've seen Dota go through many phases over the years. It's had its ups and its downs, and we can look at the decisions that Valve makes and only really speculate. For example, we used to have massive prize pools. Then Valve got rid of the main reason those prize pool numbers got so high, compendiums and battle passes. Now they're still big, but the decline has been a big talking point over recent years. Now there's no question, Valve is smart. But maybe they're not looking to just grab all the money they can while they can, like maybe most developers would. They're playing the long game. And the trend they were going on, maybe they realized wasn't very sustainable. Or maybe it's a resource issue. We know Valve has been working on other projects, most notably Deadlock. If a chunk of their development muscle is going there, then Crownfall makes more sense. A massive event that can stretch over months with mini games instead of fully separate game modes. Crownfall was ambitious and visually stunning. It gave lore fans more than they'd ever dreamed of, but it didn't hit with the same force as the greats. It was probably the best solo journey we'd ever seen in Dota, but it was just that, a solo journey. And for a game that always thrived on team play and community, that difference was impossible not to notice, even if it took a bit to realize it. Looking back, Dota's events tell a story of experimentation, community, and changing priorities. Diretide showed us Dota could be silly and festive. Dark Moon proved co-op survival could bring friends together. The Underhollow reminded us that Valve could ride trends and still make something distinctly Dota. Siltbreaker and Aghanim's Labyrinth pushed the limits to what Dota could even be, full-blown RPGs and roguelikes. And Crownfall showed a shift towards story, cosmetics, and individual progression. Some events were legendary, some were forgettable, and some outright flopped. But together, they created memories that are still part of Dota's culture today. Even if Valve doesn't make events like they used to, the legacy is clear. Dota isn't just about 5v5. It's a sandbox where anything can happen, and sometimes those experiments were the most magical part of all. And who knows, maybe one day Valve will surprise us again. After all, nobody expected Aghanim's Labyrinth to drop when it did. If history tells us anything, it's that when Valve wants to, they can always give us something unforgettable. If you're watching to this point, thank you so much. And comment something random like the name of your favorite hero to confuse other commenters and help me identify who the real ones are. Also, let me know which event was your favorite. I'd love to hear. Maybe one that I mentioned or one that I didn't. Thank you so much as always to all the members on Patreon and YouTube. If you want to support me and my content and help me creating videos just like this, consider becoming a member and getting your name added to the list of beautiful people here. I really do appreciate the support that you guys give all the time. I hope that I can keep providing entertaining content and educational content as well. I love Dota and I love this community, and the position that you guys have put me in is really special, and I'm very aware of that and I don't take it for granted. So thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I hope you learned something new with me. Bye. Peace.